Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is November 14th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Title of today's episode, Who to Believe. And what might I be talking about? Who to believe? Could mean so much. Donald Trump versus the Chinese for the trade deal? Donald Trump against the Democrats? Do we believe Donald Trump or do we believe the Democrats? Do we believe the Republicans? Or do we believe the Democrats? Is that who I'm talking about? Or maybe I'm talking about Fox News versus CNN, or CNN versus MSNBC. Who do we believe? Who do you believe? What about the Wall Street Journal versus Bloomberg versus The Economist versus Washington Post versus the New York Times? Who to believe? I think what we are witnessing, like I have been saying, this is, to me, all interconnected with the global protests. By the way, they continue. They continue everywhere. And in many pockets, they're unfortunately turning more violent by the day. The protests in Hong Kong are becoming more violent. And what was typically a protest that was taking place over the weekend is now taking place during the week, with protests taking place this entire week, and they are continuing right now. We do these podcasts later in the evening here in the United States. Hong Kong is obviously up and functioning. They are once again protesting during the day with no end in sight. And in fact, and we've been saying it's only going to be a matter of time before China starts to intervene or at least say something. And we now have President Xi of China coming out and saying that this is pretty much, turning into a boiling point. To paraphrase, and that this is pretty much, read between the lines, this is not going to be tolerated for much longer. And of course, the markets didn't like that very much because everything, again, folks, is interconnected. How can the United States sign a deal with the Chinese if the Chinese are going to intervene with a police force or with a military presence in Hong Kong? Couldn't do it, especially with the backdrop of laws about, or bills about to be passed in Congress to make its way to the desk of the president, condemning what's going on in Hong Kong and trying to keep the Chinese Communist Party at bay. Chinese have already pretty much threatened, if that becomes law, meaning both chambers of Congress pass it and Donald Trump signs it, there is going to be retaliation. So if there's retaliation, then there can't be a trade deal. So the markets understand this, and they sold off a little bit. Nothing drastic. The markets have been pretty much flat for this whole week, actually for the past couple of weeks, which is not boding too well for my volatility model. Now, of course, this could be because the Federal Reserve, well, it is because of the Federal Reserve primarily injecting just mother loads of liquidity into the system, although we haven't seen anything yet. Believe me when I tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. That's the only thing that's keeping this market afloat. And again, the possibility of a melt-up is possible. I don't assign a large probability to it, but it is possible. There's a lot of money printing going on. Lower interest rates, negative interest rates, a lot can happen. A lot can happen. Maybe there'll be a Santa Claus rally to boot. Maybe retail sales will be really strong this holiday season. That's turning out to be somewhat of a mixed bag with some of the data that's being released, but nevertheless, it's the possibility. But the markets, they did sell off a little bit on this news that President Xi is finally making some comments publicly in regards to Hong Kong. And you guessed it. Somebody from the White House had to come out later this evening to make a comment in regards to U.S.-China trade talks. Well, who pulled the short straw this time? Larry Kudlow. I said just the other day, especially I think it was on Tuesday following President Trump's speech before the Economic Club of New York. I said, look, I like Larry Kudlow. I mean, I know I joke about him here on this podcast, this, that, and the other. I used to enjoy watching his show on CNBC when he was there. Don't agree with him on everything, obviously. But nevertheless, a guy that I think tries to be a straight shooter, tries to be a cheerleader for the United States, tries to be a cheerleader for free market capitalism, used to be an advocate for the strong dollar, used to praise King Dollar all the time, but he's working for Donald Trump, Thunder Thumbs here, who is basically a lunatic when it comes to monetary policy and is attempting to devalue the dollar even faster than what the Federal Reserve already does on its own because he's calling for negative interest rates. You know what that's going to do to your purchasing power? It's going to destroy it. Okay, you think the Federal Reserve is already doing a bad job? They are. Wait till they put the pedal to the metal with negative interest rates if they go that way, if they listen to Donald Trump. It's theft. It's outright theft of your savings. But if you're for it, knock yourself out. But don't come complaining to me. So Larry Kudlow drew the short straw, and he had to come out and say, well, everything's okay, folks. We're down to the wire. We're getting ever so much closer with the U.S.-China trade deal. Quote, we are down to the short strokes. Down to the short strokes. I have no idea what this means. Are we swimming? Have we been in a pool? Are we about to hit the wall? Are we about to jump out of the pool now? Are we done? We done swimming finally for 2 years? Your arm's tired? Are we about to do the doggy paddle now? We're getting so close. I don't know. Down to the short strokes. Or is it a coded message? Short strokes? Should we short the market? Nah. Speculation. Don't go doing that. Stay diversified, please. But what does it mean? Because we were told by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin a while ago. My goodness, I don't even know how many months ago this was. We're in the final laps. Remember that? That was the terminology months ago. We're in the final laps. And if I recall correctly, I said, yeah, but how big's the pool? How big's the lap? Are we swimming across the Pacific here? Because that's what it seems like. And now we got Larry Kudlow saying we're down to the short strokes. So one would think that that's, getting pretty close. Because remember, folks, next week is when Presidents Trump and Xi were supposed to meet in Chile. Now, of course, that's not happening because of all of the violent protests that are taking place in Chile, but it's never been rescheduled. And now you have an escalation in violence and in duration and in volume with the Hong Kong protests. This is in China's backyard. President Xi cannot afford to look weak, despite what might be taking place internally with some Chinese economic data, which we discussed yesterday, which is not looking good, which is no surprise to my audience if you have been with me for a while. We are in a global slowdown. The trade war is not the cause. The slowdown was occurring before the trade war. The trade war exacerbates all of these problems. And even if there is a trade deal, all it's going to be, if there is one, big if, is a return to where it was 2 years ago. And I have a lot of doubt about that. Why? Because China has started to source agricultural products from other countries. So if Donald Trump is going to come out and say it's the best deal ever, our farmers have to go out and buy more John Deeres, they have to go out and buy more property, I'm just not going to believe it. Because we know the Chinese have struck deals with Brazil and with Russia and with France most recently, and I'm sure they've made them with others as well, which is exactly what I warned about here months ago. You got 1.4 billion mouths to feed. You're not going to sit on your hands and wait for a deal to be struck. You're going to go source supply elsewhere. And if there is a deal that's struck, the presidents of those respective countries, specifically Vladimir Putin and Bolsonaro and Macron, they're not just going to roll over and say, oh, well, the Chinese struck another deal with the Americans. I guess our farmers can take a back seat to the Americans. They're not going to do that. You wouldn't expect Donald Trump to do it. Why would we expect Putin and Bolsonaro and Macron to do it for their country? So this is the problem. Donald Trump wants to come in. Remember, 2 years ago, trade wars are easy to win. Everything's going to be okay. Meanwhile, farmers are filing bankruptcy at rates we haven't seen in years. It's not good. It's not winning. And how are we going to believe the Chinese? Are you going to trust the Chinese if they even come to the table again and make an agreement? Are you going to trust them that they're going to follow through with these agricultural products? Because that's all they're talking about here. They're not talking about the meat and potatoes of this, the intellectual property, the theft, the cyber warfare, all the big issues. This is just food. And they got 1.4 billion people to feed. This should be a no-brainer. But the art of the deal maker can't seem to close. Now again, he could be playing hardball here. He's getting closer and closer to 2020 with the election. China could be a nice scapegoat. It allows Donald Trump to play the strong man. That plays well with his base. That's what got him in part elected in 2016. All of these bad trade deals, I'm not saying that they weren't bad. I think they were in large part. But you don't make those statements. You don't put the country in harm's way. You don't during this time frame start to put out a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and a lot of flat-out lies. Because they know if there's going to be a deal or not. I mean, and it's really pathetic that these machines that do the vast majority of the trading in the stock market continue to buy this line of BS. All you got to do is send out one of these idiots. And I'm going to have to start throwing Larry Kudlow into that mix. Usually I just like to keep it to Peter Navarro, that idiot, the one who needs fired. I like to keep it to him. But Larry, they keep sending him out there. He's just turning out to be a spineless yes man for Donald Trump and company. Go out there and tell him there's going to be a deal. Make something up. Tell him, we're down to the short strokes, Larry. Go ahead. And the markets loved it, by the way, folks. The last time I checked the futures markets, because Larry Kudlow said this after the markets were closed this evening, they're up. They're up. They're rallying. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Up 0.4% last time I looked. It could be higher. Who knows? Who knows? Just keep it going. Just keep it going. This market just likes funny money. It likes the counterfeit. And it likes a bunch of hot air from the White House and, members of the administration. Maybe you like it. I don't. Because it's blowing a bubble. It's filled with air. It's a house of cards built on sand. Not on solid ground, not off of concrete, off of hot air. It's a con game. I don't want my 401k going up at any cost. You might, that's your business. Good luck on the way down. Because when this thing pops, when it bursts, which is inevitable, are you going to be ready on the other side? And who are you going to blame? You going to take any responsibility for it? You like the high. Do you like the hangover? That's all I'm saying. All parties come to an end. Stay diversified. And who to believe? Which I've been saying for months now. It comes down to the entire question of credibility. I mean, I'm honestly, and I hope you are too, are getting sick and tired of being jerked around. I don't like being jerked around. Maybe you do. This is going on 2 years now. There's going to be a deal, A couple days ago, given his speech again at the Economic Club of New York, Donald Trump says, the deal's got to be better for the United States. And if there is not a phase one deal, then tariffs are going to go up significantly. Well, we're getting down to the wire, aren't we? We are 1 month away from December 15th when tariffs are supposed to go up. More tariffs are supposed to come into effect on further Chinese goods. And as far as we know, we are no closer to a deal. We do know that there is a continuation of the Hong Kong protests. President Xi is now making comments publicly about those protests. Again, if Hong Kong feels emboldened to continue this, will that mean that Taiwan will feel emboldened to, I don't necessarily know, start to protest, but maybe come out in a show of force politically with some of their politicians denouncing China in a more forceful manner? If that happens, President Xi is going to have to act, and the United States cannot sign a deal with him. Given the human rights violations that China and the Chinese Communist Party are engaged in, I don't think we should be doing business with them at all anyway. I don't think anybody should be, but everybody wants that money, and that's what makes this world go round. It's not about free speech. It's not about American values. It's about profits at any and all costs. Just like your 401k. Just let it go up at any and all costs. Doesn't matter if it's fraud. Doesn't matter if it's money printing. Doesn't matter if it's a bunch of BS from the White House saying that there's going to be a trade deal for the 200th time in the past, 18 months. Doesn't matter. Just go up. You're going to be ready when it comes down. That's my only question to you. You and only you can answer that question. But who to believe? Now, do you believe Donald Trump or do you believe Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats with this whole impeachment thing? Or do you go to your corner of Fox News, or do you go to your corner of MSNBC, or do you go to your corner of CNN or your other media outlet, whoever you're watching or listening to or reading? You just go into your silo? A couple weeks ago I said, do me a favor. Do yourself a favor. Watch some of the other stations. Listen to some other things. Read some different articles from different outlets that you don't normally listen to or watch or read. Just don't do it for me, but do it for you. Did you do it? Did you learn something new? Did you hear a different opinion that may have made sense? You said, well, you know what? I didn't think about it like that before. That somewhat makes sense. Because this country is too divided. And we unfortunately have politicians, including the President of the United States, who is not rising above it. Continues to poke people in the eye, poke the bear, continues with the divisiveness. You know, Abraham Lincoln, a house divided cannot stand. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is not rising to the occasion like Abraham Lincoln did when the country was divided. Donald Trump is contributing to the divisiveness with his tweets, with his statements, with his comments. I understand standing up for yourself. I understand pushing back a little bit. But there also comes a time where you can stand up for the country. Put aside the ego, put aside the pettiness, and stand up and be a leader. You don't have to play the elementary schoolyard games. You're the President of the United States. Act like it. It's all a disgrace. Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, they're no better. But they're not the President of the United States. They should be rising above it too. That, although, with everything being said, it doesn't mean that this impeachment inquiry is a complete sham. And like I said, given what we know, given the transcript or the quasi-transcript that was released by Donald Trump a month or so ago, it warrants an investigation. It warrants an investigation. Does that transcript in and of itself rise to an impeachable offense and something that warrants the removal of Donald Trump from office? I don't think that it does. I've said that from the beginning. I've been consistent with it. I don't think that in and of itself does. But if there is evidence through an investigation that shows that this was the intent, this was the purpose, that Donald Trump personally or his inner circle was more concerned with politics, with more concerned about investigating Joe Biden and his son for 2020 purposes as opposed to policy purposes in keeping the Russians at bay and protecting an ally in Ukraine, that's going to be problematic because that would be crossing the line. That would be an abuse of power because he's putting politics above policy. And this is not the campaign trail. This is taxpayer money. Okay, he wants to do this with his own funds on the campaign trail, make an argument there. That's his business. He wants to do it with campaign funds from the PACs who support him, from average voters who give him money. That's one thing. You make the argument on the campaign trail. But to use taxpayer dollars that have been appropriated by Congress, remember, Congress controls the purse strings. They said it was in the best interest of the United States to give this military and security aid to Ukraine. It's then incumbent upon Donald Trump as the executive branch, the leader of the executive branch, to make good on that aid, to deliver it to Ukraine. He did so in 2017. He did so in 2018. Joe Biden was not his political rival. 2019, Joe Biden is his political rival. He's a front runner. And Donald Trump holds up the aid. The aid gets released. Republicans are making the argument, at least this is what they were making publicly the other day during the hearings, saying, look, you got 55 days. 55 days when this was held up, Donald Trump and everybody else was meeting with Zelensky, talking with Zelensky, sizing him up, making sure everything was okay, that this guy's on the up and up, and then the aid was released. Conveniently, again, with the convenient political amnesia that exists in Washington, D.C., I'm telling you, it is contagious. The Republicans conveniently left out the fact that during that same time frame, there was a whistleblower report. That whistleblower complaint became known to Congress. And whoa, Nelly, the White House said, we better get rid of this. We better give this aid to Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened. So there's the argument. The Republicans, the White House, are going to simply say he was vetting Zelensky, seeing if he was on the up and up, because we're not going to send all of this military aid to them if he's going to waste it, yada, yada, yada. That's going to be their argument. And on the other side, the Democrats are likely going to say, well, yeah, he released it. One, because he had to, because it was the law. And two, because he became aware of a whistleblower complaint. And so he didn't want to have to deal with the politics of everything and the potential crime. So he released it that way. So who do you believe? We are in the process of finding out who to believe. We had the closed-door depositions. You have the release of those transcripts that have been made public. Now you have the public hearings. And I think it's quite shameful to some degree that a lot of the conservative news outlets, particularly Fox News, even Rush Limbaugh, Dan Bongino and company, we're going after the character and the integrity of George Kent and Ambassador Taylor, the two gentlemen who testified in open hearings just the other day. Why do you have to go after their character? Why do you have to say that they look like they're homeless? Why do you have to go after and say they look like they're boring, they're nerds? How does that help anybody? How does that rise above the divisiveness? Because if the Republicans want to point the finger at the Democrats, well, then they just did it too. I mean, aren't you supposed to go after what they said? Not after their character, not after their integrity? I mean, these people, whether or not you like them or not, they have somewhat of a pretty good record of serving this country. Ambassador Taylor was called back out of retirement by Secretary Pompeo. I don't think Secretary Pompeo is a never-Trumper. Do you? So where's the deep state conspiracy on that one? Because he brought Bill Taylor back in. He asked him to come back. And he did. To serve his country. To go over to Ukraine. Is that what we've come to? That it's all name-calling? That it's all, elementary schoolyard tactics and name-calling? Aren't we supposed to be better than this? I would hope so. But apparently we're not. But that's what you get. You listen to some Fox News, that's what these people are saying. And then they're talking about it being boring. Nobody's watching, nobody's listening, blah, blah, blah. It's boring. I didn't know this was supposed to be exciting. I didn't know everybody was supposed to gather around the television with a bowl of popcorn. This is a sad day in this country that we're going through an impeachment inquiry. It's a sad day. Not because I'm a Republican and Donald Trump's my guy, because I'm not, and he isn't. It's a sad day because of where we find ourselves with this divisiveness. Impeachment is a serious process. It's only happened a few times in the history of this country. And here it is again, front and center. But no, let's focus on that. It's supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be reality TV. It's supposed to be a TV tease, I guess, to these people on Fox News or some conservative outlets. And then you have the other side, pushing their own conspiracy theories that, Donald Trump is corrupt as the day is long. We'll find out. But I think a lot of Democrats are involved in that camp too, being corrupt as the day is long. There's a lot of hypocrisy on both sides. That's why the title of this podcast is Who to Believe. Because everybody turns in and tunes in to the outlets that repeats and reiterates what you already think and believe. That's why I said do yourself a favor and turn on the other stations. Read some other papers. Listen to other radio programs. Go out there and do yourself a favor. See if you can even be convinced. Or are you just that dead set and siloed in? Because if you're that siloed in, if you're not open-minded at all, and you like the name-calling, and you like the fact that this is boring and not exciting, then again, you're part of the problem. You're not a part of the solution. I am trying to be a voice, to be a help or some sort of assistance to the solution. Everybody wants to swipe at the branches. I am trying to strike at the root of the problem. Discuss this at length in our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. Try to do my best here to discuss that on this podcast as frequently as possible. With going after the Federal Reserve, explaining who they are, what they do, why they do it, and the consequences that occur downstream. Income tax, how that affects you, why it's not good, why both of those things, the Federal Reserve and the federal income tax, need to be abolished. Because everything else, you're just swiping at branches. You're attacking the symptoms. I'm trying to strike at the root cause of the disease. And that's the problem. You have to stay focused. So many people are easily diverted on other topics. Maybe this impeachment is a diversion tactic. Who knows? I do know from what I have read that I think Donald Trump is in a little bit of trouble. He's in some trouble here. I want to know what Rudy Giuliani's doing. Because that's the other argument that we talked about yesterday with the Republicans going after the two witnesses yesterday. These are second, third-hand witnesses, so to speak. Where's the first-hand? Well, we know who the first-hand witnesses are. Donald Trump's not allowing them to testify. And we even had Nancy Pelosi come out and give remarks and take some questions from the press this afternoon. And she was alluding to the fact that, well, we're not necessarily moving forward with articles of impeachment yet. We're still making our way through the impeachment inquiry, which is the correct and proper thing to say. She's not jumping to conclusions on that, but she did bring up the word bribery. That bribery, if we move forward with impeachment, and in all honesty, the Democrats are likely to move forward with articles of impeachment, that one of those articles of impeachment will be pertaining to bribery. Okay, and that's actually something that's in the Constitution. Bribery, treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors. Okay, so that'll be interesting. Nancy Pelosi also brought up to Donald Trump, basically calling him out by name. She said, look, Mr. President, if you have exculpatory evidence, if you have information, and she basically said, that means, Mr. President, if you have evidence or information that will exonerate you, bring it forward. Bring it forward. We would welcome that. And she even said, whether or not she believes it or not, she at least said the right thing and said that impeachment is not a good thing for this country. It's divisive. This is what happens. But, she wants to say, we swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that's why we're doing this. Okay. At least she admits that it's divisive. At least she understands that. But that's exactly what I said yesterday, too, and have been saying for quite a while. If Donald Trump, Mr. President, sir, if you have evidence that can just shut everything down, that this is a sham, that it's a witch hunt, that this is unjust, and you can show that there is corruption perhaps on the other side that needs to be prosecuted, then release it. This is not a game show. This is not The Apprentice. We don't need to be teased and jerked around for the season finale. This country is not a game. Have to rise above it, and you have to take your oath and your office seriously. And I think with a lot of things that have come down the pike recently, I don't think the president does take a lot of it seriously. And that's unfortunate. I give this president credit where credit is due. There are a lot of things that I have agreed with him on. There are a lot of things I applaud him on. And if you've been with me, you know this. But a lot of what's coming down the pike, a lot of what has been said, I can't stand for. I can't stand for. It's been 3 years. The rhetoric has not toned down. The tweets have not toned down. The jerking us around with the trade talks has not stopped at all. Again, it even continued this evening. Calls for negative interest rates and quantitative easing just to keep this bubble going as long as possible. Ruinous, disastrous to this country. He doesn't care. And unfortunately, it's sort of another point in agreeing with something that Russia is attempting to do, because there were reports out today that Russia, Vladimir Putin, is trying to move away from keeping U.S. dollars in reserves, which is something that we've been discussing here on this podcast a couple of months ago. We said, be on the lookout for an agreement between China and India and Turkey and Russia, and perhaps some others as well. There was even an article out today, I think, too, with the BRICS nation. That would be Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America, that they are, sort of forming a coalition to move against isolationism and unilateralism, which is a, big middle finger, basically, to the United States and Donald Trump with his current policy when it comes to trade. That's not good, because those 5 countries represent an enormous amount of global GDP and an enormous amount of human population. So if they're starting to form some sort of coalition to move away from the U.S. dollar, that's not going to be good. If that's what Vladimir Putin wants, and Donald Trump at the same time is calling for quantitative easing and negative interest rates, well, that's destruction of the U.S. dollar. That's the same thing as those countries moving away from the U.S. dollar. That's not going to be good for your cost of living, folks. That's not going to be good for your 401k, okay? Believe me when I tell you. So that's another thing that doesn't point in the right direction as far as I'm concerned with Donald Trump, all right? I don't like it. And neither should you if you understand what all of this means. And I hope, if you've been paying attention to this podcast, that you are starting to get a better understanding of what the Federal Reserve does, and why this policy of zero interest rates, negative interest rates, is not good. I hope you're understanding that, because that's really why I do this podcast. That's what it's all about, because there's not a big enough understanding of who these people are and what they do. There just isn't. You're not taught about it in school. And they're not going to teach you about this in school because they don't want you to know, all right? And I don't even go into all of the technical stuff, all right? It's just a lot to get to. So that's the question, who to believe. Who to believe. Sad day. On some economic fronts, we have Germany just once again by the skin of their teeth, not entering a technical recession, with a technical recession being 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. The previous quarter, the second quarter of this year, went negative slightly. The third quarter just came out positive 0.1%. Positive 0.1% in Germany. So just by the skin of their teeth, they averted a technical recession. We'll see what happens next quarter. We have the cash freight index. The report for October was just released. And again, you have further deterioration in the cash freight index. The author of that report continues to stand by their prediction that by the end of this year, the United States will enter a contraction, meaning negative GDP. Of course, we will be in the fourth quarter. We are in the fourth quarter. Third quarter numbers came out. They were positive. So if the cash freight index report is to hold any water, we are likely to see a negative print for the fourth quarter. Time will tell. We will know at the end of January. We'll have some other indicators that will come out during that time with other ISM, PMI numbers. We'll have a good pulse as to how well the U.S. consumer did for this holiday shopping season. We're only a couple weeks away from Black Friday, so we're going to have a good understanding. And then everything else, they always move these dates up. You know, everybody's got to buy things sooner rather than later. That's the American spirit. Forget about Thanksgiving and the true meaning of it. Forget about the true meaning of Christmas. Let's just buy crap earlier and earlier on credit cards for things that we can't afford. But that's okay. Who to believe? You tell me. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, and leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.